right, welcome to Ireb's next podcast. Today we've got probably one of our best guests yet. We've got the state chair of the Minnesota DFL party, Ken Martin. Ken, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm really honored to be here.
Well, and I'm glad to have it. I've been dogging you for 2 years to sit down and have a meeting of some kind, and so when I finally did get a little bit of your time, and you're a busy man, and I appreciate that. I wanted to get it on a recording so we could share it with everyone else in our group because, we've been down here in CD2 working for the last couple of years. And, this will be our first chance to introduce you to our folks. And so they know who you are. Let's get them to know a little bit more about who you are. So, first of all, I did a little bit of reading on, so I kind of know a little bit. So I'm kind of going into this. I'm going to ask you some padded questions. But where did you grow up and what did you do for a living before you were working with the party? Just a few bios like that. Can you fill us in?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and graduated in 1991 and got involved, actually. My first campaign was with Paul Wellstone in 1990 on that campaign. When I was still in high school, I worked on that campaign. And then after that, went to work for him both in St. Paul and Washington, and my earliest start in politics was with Paul, as you know. But before that, actually, in sort of my seminal moments in politics were not through a partisan lens, but really through an issue-based lens. I remember the earliest memory of my mom was when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, marching in ERA marches with her at the state capitol. Then in the late 80s, my grandfather had been diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, and in fact had come out of the closet in 1980. And I remember being at a commitment ceremony for him and his partner, my other grandfather, which was really unheard of at the time. But when he was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, my family and I really started to get involved in a lot of the funding fights around HIV/AIDS funding in the late 80s. And as you remember, those were pretty serious fights. And so, for me, I wasn't raised in a sort of overly partisan household. I don't remember having much communication about the DFL party per se, but we certainly were involved in issue causes and things that we held near and dear in terms of our family. My dad was a Republican, is a Republican, I should say. He's no longer a Republican. He's left. My mom, I would consider her, and she's gone now, but I would consider her a pretty progressive. So, for me, I heard a lot about issues and causes growing up, but really didn't start to get involved in partisan politics until.
Well, that's a great story. So, coming in through the issue thing, what was the first moment that you decided? Because now you had another career before this, right?
No, look, I've been doing campaigns since 1990. I've been working in campaigns and elections for 28 years now, running campaigns up and down the ballot in Minnesota and other parts of the country. 92, I worked on the Clinton-Gore campaign. That was my first presidential campaign, also the first time that I could vote. And that was a really exciting time in my life, and really also another seminal moment, because that in addition to my work for Paul in 90, really instilled in me a sense that electoral politics mattered, that campaigns mattered, that we can actually make a difference and change things through getting people elected who share our values. And so, I've worked on campaigns as small as city council races all the way up to presidential campaigns, and I had a great fortune of running many of them here in Minnesota. So it's a long history of political activism, that's for sure.
Well, we will have another campaign for you to do, so help out a little bit with this cycle. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. All right, so you kind of covered our question. One of Ireb's favorite questions is what was that moment that got you involved, that made you stand up from your normal, comfortable life? And that's kind of what our membership is. And so to give you a little bit of information, our folks, really were people who weren't involved in a party. We have some folks that were previously Dems, maybe at one point or another, and some that were other parties. And, they basically hadn't been involved, and they got involved, after Trump got elected. And so we were kind of like a collection point for folks like that. And, and so our question always to them was, what was it that made you change your mind and not be a citizen and decide that, this was important? And so, you just having lived around it, I don't know, was there a moment like that for you?
Well, I think when I started to work for Paul, I saw this bushy-haired college professor who shared many of my beliefs about the power of changing people's lives and what politics should be about, which is helping to improve our communities and helping improve people's lives. And Paul, for those who had a chance to know him, had a magnetic personality. He had the ability to inspire people and to really bring out the best in people in terms of having aspirations and hopes for the future and what our communities could look like. And for me, he was willing to stand up and fight for them. He was willing to stand up and say what he believed. He was very authentic. And in an era now where we thirst for authenticity, even back then in the early 90s, authenticity was a rare commodity in politics. And so for me, that was really the start of my understanding the importance of electing people to office, not just being involved in issue movements and causes that you care about, but understanding that the two of those go hand in hand, that you can care deeply about an issue, but if you don't get people elected who share your values and are willing to push the ball forward on those issues, you're never going to make progress. And Paul used to talk the progressive triangle. On one side of the triangle was the movement. So you have to have a movement that supports good public policy to actually move it forward, right? And then the other side of the triangle is that public policy, the ideas, the thought behind it. And then the third side of that, the third leg of that triangle is elections and getting people elected who have those, support those ideas and then have a movement behind those ideas, right? So if you have a candidate who doesn't have good thoughts or ideas supported by a movement, then they're not going to be as effective, right? If you just have a movement without good ideas, you're not going to get far. If you have a movement and good ideas without someone in office, you're never going to get anything done. And so it's the idea of how do you move things along? How do you move the agenda along so you can actually achieve results and make a difference in our community? So for me, a long answer to your short question is that's really been my inspiration in politics. Why do I do this job? Well, it's a very thankless job, but the reason I do it is because I believe my way to help make a difference in this world and is to really elect people to office. I still believe, as cynical as people are these days about politics, I still believe that politics is the biggest catalyst for change in our country and our world, and we need to be engaged in it. And one of the things that you mentioned, which I was so excited about in 2016, we were so depressed after that election, but what really re-inspired me and gave me hope was seeing all the people who came out of the woodwork. Some who hadn't been involved for years, right? They were involved maybe 20, 30 years ago, but they were getting re-engaged because they were so frustrated by what they saw in that election. And then many new people. I can't tell you, Mark, how many people I would run into on a daily basis over the last several years who would come up to me and say, I never thought I would be involved in politics, yet here I am because I believe our democracy's at stake, our country's at stake, and I had no other choice yet to roll up my sleeves and get involved. I went to an Indivisible meeting out in Chaska, Minnesota, probably the January after the 16 election. So this was January 17. There's probably a couple hundred people in this room in Chaska, right? Mm-hmm. My old high school football coach, Mr. Risky, who I actually thought was dead. I didn't know he was still alive. He's 80 some odd years old. He's sitting in the back of the room. I asked people in that room how many of them were Democrats. Maybe about 20 hands went up or so, right? How many of them were Republicans? Surprisingly, maybe, I don't know, about 10 or so hands. And then the rest of them, I said, how many of you consider yourself independents? Almost everyone else raised their hand, and it was the vast majority of the room. So what we found is that the resistance that helped fuel our victories in 2018 was not just fueled by people who were Democrats. It was fueled by people who had a deep, deep, abiding commitment to democracy and to our country and to our state. And they felt that they had to get involved in that election. And I thank those folks. I thank all of you for the work that you're doing, because it really is. I think our party after the 2016 election, we were at a low water mark. Morale was low. And we needed someone to give us a big kick in the ass and say, you know what, get back out there and keep fighting. Don't give up. And I give all the credit for that to the resistance groups, I included. I mean, honestly, Mark, I think many people were ready to give up. But when you turn around and you saw all the people who weren't giving up and all the people who were re-engaging, that gave us all hope for the future. And we saw that manifest itself in the 2018 election.
Yeah, I think so too. I have to agree with that. And actually, that was one of our upcoming questions is like, what we did right. It was exciting as we brought people into this process. It was, it's what kept me going is like, there's a new level of participation. And this is what I believe in, a new level of participation that, we can expect out of our citizenry that will achieve, that people will become involved, that this whole not having political conversations to play company is going to stop. We're going to learn how to have the hard conversations in all situations so that we can conduct ourselves appropriately. I wanted to get back to your job though, because, I was looking at you on the, beforehand. My goodness, you're doing a lot of work. And so what do you actually do for a living? So you're chair of the Minnesota DFL party, and you have been for 4 terms, and you're running for a 5th one. And we'll talk about that too. And then you've got a couple of jobs at the national level that you're sitting on now. Now, give us a little bit of a rundown of what your day is like.
Well, look, I've been really fortunate to serve as the state DFL chair for the last 8 years. That's my full-time job. That's my day-to-day job. That's what I get paid to do. When I came in as chair in 2011, early 2011, Mark Dayton, incoming governor, asked me to do the job after I helped get him elected. And, my first response was, hell no, why would anyone want this job? It is a very thankless job. And as he says when he introduces me, Ken's got the toughest job in politics. It's a political equivalency of being a fire hydrant. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? But let me say, I really enjoyed that job. I made it a full-time job because the demands of politics these days, and particularly of political parties, demand that the person running the organization really devote all their heart and soul and energy to the I have over the last 8 years I've been chair. 2 years ago in Atlanta, February of 2017, I was elected by my peers, state party chairs, vice chairs, and executive directors around the country as the president of the Association of State Democratic Chairs. And so my title is affectionately known as the chair of the chairs. And it's a great honor to be able to represent all the state parties at the DNC. Of course, the state chairs, vice chairs are the largest voting bloc of the DNC, so it's a fairly important position. In addition to that, I serve as a vice chair of the DNC. So my role as president of the ASDC and as a vice chair of the DNC, what I'm able to do now is take a lot of what we've been able to do here in Minnesota, both during my time these last 8 years and frankly before that, right? Minnesota has always been regarded as one of the strongest state parties in the country. And we've been able to take what we know and export it out to other states around the country. So in addition to traveling around Minnesota and helping organize our units here, I've been spending a lot of time on the road, going around the country and helping state build up the capacity as they come into these critical, really meaningful work. It's been really exciting to help build long-term infrastructure. And that's the other piece of what I love about party work is that, candidates will come and go. We see that over the years, right? But the one thing that remains is the political party. The DFL party will be here long after I'm gone, long after you're gone. And what are we doing right now in a very intentional and purposeful way to actually build long-term political infrastructure so we're not recreating the wheel every 2 years? That's one of the most exciting parts of my job is the ability to build something that's permanent, to help lift up all of the boats, so to speak, make sure all of our parties across the country have that infrastructure in place. And then obviously, as you know, Mark, I've led a lot of the reforms within the on the national level. The superdelegate reform that passed was a reform that I authored and championed through the process. Many of the reforms that we saw to sort of open up and democratize the process are things that not only did I support, authored on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and I'm very proud of the fact that, look, we learned from the mistakes of the 2016 election, and we're making our party more responsive to the grassroots, and that's also something I'm really proud of.
Well, and I want to thank you for that too, on the air and in front of all of our audience. You did a wonderful job of providing resources to our organization as we went through the last couple of years. Some of the folks that we worked with, they were awesome, and I do appreciate that. I came into this 2 years ago after Trump got elected, and I was mad. I was a Bernie guy, and so I came in with the narrative in my head, like, something's wrong with this Democratic Party and I'm here to fix it. And I wanted to shake my fist at something. And so I didn't understand the complexities, like what the party is and what the candidates are, and that there's different levels. You have like the nonpartisan levels at the county and so on. And so we've been trying to educate our members on that and on those complexities and, the various, the subtleties of politics that are involved. And one of the things I wanted to also say was that, coming in with my, ready to shake my fist a little bit at the party, I have gained a whole new respect for the work that you do. I mean, you personally, and, there's been a couple of times I wanted to walk up and say, I don't know how you hold it all together, Ken. You do a pretty good job. So, I do, appreciate the work that you've been doing, and I just wanted to pass that on. Yes.
Well, let me just say on that, I mean, there's a plaque in my office that used to hang above Rudy Perprich's office that says, none of us are as smart as all of us. And it's something I really believe. No one has all the answers. And the reality is what I love. The other thing I love about this party is we're a big tent party. We have people with different life experiences, professional experiences. We have a wide degree of people in terms of where they fall on the ideological spectrum. We don't expect people to march lockstep. We actually welcome debate and dissension. That we actually believe as Democrats that makes us have this type of debate. And so, I've never felt that any of those criticisms were. I think they're healthy for our party to grow, is to continue to think through new ways of organizing, new ways to approach any issue. And, I feel very fortunate to lead the party during this time. It's certainly renaissance for the Democratic Party nationally, and hopefully even for us here in Minnesota. We're, I'm biased here. I always think we're on the leading edge of things, but I think there's a lot more we can do to improve, and I'm committed to doing that for the next 2 years. So.
Well, I think you're actually right. I think you're onto something. And you live in Senate District 51, which is, my home Senate district, which is one of the more successful ones. And actually in CD2 being a part of, or Senate District 51 being a part of CD2, we saw stuff down here in this last election cycle, that was pretty amazing. And I wanted to kind of get to that too. Like it was a great election. We just, it was so needed after all the abuses that we've been watching for the last couple of years, to see how, people came out and repudiate that style of leadership. And, we flipped all those seats, the House seats down here but, what did we do right? I mean, how did we get this? I know you guys were active. You had a lot of plans. You're applying resources in a very strategic fashion, and you're watching us trying to get it. I mean, we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, what did we do right? How did we get it? I mean, we did it better here in CD2 than I think anywhere in the country. We flipped more House races, local state House races, than anywhere else in the country. And I've been looking around. Nobody else has had the level of success that we had. What did we do right?
Well, I think a couple things. First off, it starts with that energy and momentum. It starts with a sense of purpose. And the reality is that we saw this enthusiasm like we've never seen before in our party, this energy, primarily fueled, like I said, by a lot of the resistance groups. But what we saw early on, it started to create a snowball effect where that energy just kept feeding upon itself and kept bringing in more and more energy. And so ultimately, we were able to do a lot more than we direct voter contact, knocking on doors, talking to voters face to face. We know in Minnesota that's the most effective way of actually persuading people and to mobilizing voters to the polls is to have those very meaningful conversations one-on-one. And because of this unprecedented volunteer turnout, not just during the last month of the campaign, but in months leading up to the election, the reality is we were able to do much more. We were able to have many more meaningful conversations with voters than we ever did before. And I think this is really important. There was a unity that I've also never seen before, right? One of the concerns I had after the 2016 election was whether or not our party could ever come together again, right? There was this huge rift. And we saw that manifest itself in the general election where many supporters of another candidate decided either to stay home and not vote or vote party candidate. And we didn't see that in 2018. We had primaries in our party here in Minnesota, and the supporters of those candidates who lost in those races didn't just pick up their marbles and go home. They said, you know what? I'm not going to let perfect be the enemy of good. What I'm going to do is roll up my sleeves and commit myself to the candidate that's standing and to the DFL because we know how important it is to win the governor's race. We know how important it is to win other races up and down the ballot. And that, to me, again, reinstilled my hope for our party moving forward because if we're going to win the presidency in 2020, we have to do exactly what we did in 2018, which led to our success. One, was unity, and two was an energy like we've never seen before. So people ask me all the time, how are we going to win? Those are the ways we win, right? It's not necessarily just about candidates and the issues. Sure, let's not take away from all the great candidates we have in the race. But if all of us commit ourselves like we did in 2018 to just going out there and doing the hard work and maintaining that energy level and getting behind whoever our nominee is, then we'll win. And, you know, look, don't get me wrong. Someone attacked me the other day because I said, you know, vote blue no matter who. And they said, well, how could you say that? You're trying to force a candidate on us. I'm not trying to force anyone on anyone. All I'm trying to say is the stakes are too high in this upcoming election for us to let perfect be the enemy of good. I don't care who the Democratic candidate is. Whoever it is, I'm going to support that person because I want Donald Trump out of the White House, and I hope other people will do the same thing. But what I'm saying is for us, what I saw in 18 was magical. In my 28 years in politics, I'd never seen anything like it. People were unified, there was a sense of purpose, and there was more energy than I've ever seen before.
I have to agree completely with that too. You know, there wasn't that kind of talk about, oh, I'm not voting for this candidate because it's, you know, it's not progressive enough. I think we're seeing, you know, the progressive ideals being elevated. And so we don't have to push for perfect anymore. You know, we're seeing how this works. And I think people are being buoyed up by it. And as we get close to the end of our visit, I wanted to actually talk about the biggest race that's probably going to be in Minnesota, because we all love Amy so much. I mean, she's in the race. You know, if she gets some traction down there, we could actually, you know, see how, I mean, I believe if she's still in the race by the time caucus comes to Minnesota, she is going to resoundingly, you know, take the state. So I think, you know, there's a lot of excitement here. What do you want to say about that race?
Well, first, let me say that as a national officer, we've signed neutrality pledges. And that's another reform that was brought forward by Chairman Perez and myself and others, that we're going to stay completely neutral in this race. And while I love Amy Klobuchar, she's been a friend of mine for 20 years, wonderful senior senator for this state, and I think she will do well. I am, you know, decidedly neutral in this race. I wish her the best of luck, of course, and I don't disagree with your assessment. If she makes it all the way to Minnesota, she certainly will do well in this state. Look, I feel very blessed in this presidential race. We have wonderful candidates that really speak to our values. All of them that have announced so far are fantastic candidates that bring something unique, by the way, each of them to the race. Whether it's a sort of a demographic that they're representing, a geographic area they're representing, a set of values that they're representing. It really shows the broad breadth of our party. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. We are a big tent. And I think we should And, my admonition, for lack of a better word, to everyone is, let's not work on tearing the Democratic candidates down. Let's build them up. Let's celebrate what each of them is bringing to the table. And let's find a way to, turn our attention to tearing down the people who don't share our values, the Republicans in particular. And, that would be my admonition, right? Let's just talk. You'll never hear me utter one bad word, as I haven't ever utter one bad word about Democrats that run for office. That's not my job, and I will never engage in that type of activity. And I hope others follow suit here. The stakes are too high. And the last thing I would say is, it's exciting, obviously, as a Minnesotan, to have a fellow Minnesotan run for office. And it will be fun to see Amy campaign out there. And I know a lot of folks who are already supporting her. As more candidates come into the state, we'll welcome any of them into Minnesota, and we'll do the same to make sure that they're heard by their supporters and other DFLers.
Awesome job, Ken. Thank you very much for coming on our podcast. I look forward to and we're going to have that beer soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, take care. Thank you very much.
Sooner than later, I need one.
Yes. All right.